kind of did a thing. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. I want to apologize in advance if the wind is terrible out here. The reason we're out here today is because I recently picked up two lenses. That is the Sony 70-200 f4 lens, as well as the Sony 70-200 G Master lens. Now, you're probably questioning why I bought two of almost the exact same lens. The reason for that is because I couldn't decide between the two lenses. So today, I'm gonna test out both of them, and whichever one I like better, I'm going to keep. Whichever one I like less, I'm going to return. So let's get into today's video.
Oh yeah. Look at this guy. What's up, bro?
My boy PJ just pulled up. He offered to let me use his car as a test subject. Yeah, so we're gonna get set up right now and we're gonna test out both lenses. All right, so here is the deal with the camera setup. So on this one, this is my A7 III sporting the 70-200 f4. And here I have a Sony A7 II sporting the 70-200 2.8. So right now I'm gonna position PJ into where I want him, and then we're gonna do some test shots with both of the lenses. All right, so step one, I gotta frame him up. I don't know how far I really need to be for this. First lens we're gonna be testing out is the A7 III with the 70-200 f4. I figured it would be better to go with more expensive camera, cheap lens, and then cheap camera with the more expensive lens to kind of make it even. All right, so a little comparison physically between these two lenses. Like I said, I'm running two A7 bodies on here, which for the most part weigh about the same. And the f4 is a lot lighter than the 2.8. And I looked at the specs, I think it's almost at exactly a full pound lighter than the 2.8. So it definitely feels nicer holding it, especially since with the A7 III I tend to use a battery grip. So I don't know how I feel about all this extra weight. Image quality wise, it is kind of hard to tell. I'm gonna have to wait till I get behind the computer to really like analyze the photos. Also, it's gonna be a little bit different because the A7 III color science is a little bit different from the A7 II color science. But when we get back, we'll check that out. Okay, so I just said that we were going to go over the photos when I got home, but a little change of plans because they're doing construction at my place. I don't really have the most quiet spot to film, and I know I'm currently out in a public space. This is a park and there's a lot of noise going in the background. The highway's literally right there, but I still thought it was a better option than hearing a whole bunch of banging and construction going on in the next room. So when I did actually get home and I checked out the photos from each camera, I realized that the color science between the two cameras was a little bit off. The A7 II was a little bit more pinkish, whereas the A7 III was maybe like a little bit more blue. So I actually wound up doing a separate shoot with both cameras because I wanted to get a full feel for each lens individually, how it is to shoot with the 70-200 f4 and how it is to shoot with the 70-200 f2.8 with the same camera body, how it is carrying it around, how it is using it. So I actually wound up doing 3 other shoots, and it kind of doesn't really make sense because I only have the 2 lenses, so why did I do 3 shoots? I wound up doing 3 other shoots because one of them was an attempt at shooting and a fail, so I had to go out 3 times so that way I could get the full use of testing out the 70-200 f2.8 on my A7 III and getting the full use of the 70-200 f4 on my A7 III. So let's talk about the first photo shoot that I did. I borrowed my friend's Dodge Charger and I went out somewhere local to take photos, and it was a little dark outside. The sun was just about fully set, so I figured that would be the perfect opportunity to test the low light capabilities of the 70-200 f2.8. Now, whatever photos I did, I had to make sure that when I shot with the f4, it was in a similar location. Also, it was a little hard when I was shooting the Porsche photos to differentiate between which photo was for which camera and which lens. So I actually wound up using different cars when I went out to shoot with the f4. So looking at this first photo, it's actually my favorite photo of the entire shoot because it's just ridiculously sharp. So if I zoom all the way into this photo, I do see a little bit of noise, but it's really not that bad. And the colors, the background, the compression, the blurriness, everything about this lens, everything about shooting with this lens was just amazing. All of the images came out extremely sharp, and it was pretty dark. I don't have my settings in front of me. I don't have the metadata, so I'll do my best to put them on the screen. So this next photo that I'm looking at, if you look really closely, there was actually a little bit of artifacting around the headlights, so I did have to try and position the camera a little bit differently. And then I also wound up eventually taking the polarizer off. This next photo that we're gonna look at was in a little bit of a darker setting. The contrast between the foreground and the background as far as lighting goes is actually very significantly different. I was in a pretty shaded area, so the car was pretty dark, and I believe my ISO was cranked up pretty high, but I was also trying to level it out because I didn't want to overexpose the sky too much because I wanted to pull some details back from that. Alright, so now that I showed you a couple of photos from the f2.8, let's look at some of the photos from the f4. So this first one that we're going to be looking at is actually a photo of my Miata in the exact same location that I parked the Charger. It's a couple days later, but the timing is pretty similar. The aperture is open fully wide at f4, and I don't know exactly what the ISO was. Again, I'm going to have to put the metadata on the screen. So I actually didn't shoot in the same second location as I did with the Charger in front of the Wonder Wheel, and the reason for that is because it was actually starting to get pretty dark, and I also had a friend of mine coming to bring his car because originally I was supposed to shoot his car where I parked my Miata, but because he was taking so long, I wound up shooting my Miata there instead. But he finally came through and we wound up going to another location. But before we did, I actually took a few photos of the interior to see how detailed I could get. And this photo that I'm looking at right now, it's pretty noisy, although I do still think it's a very usable image. It's definitely an image that I would be willing to post on social media. I think it's creative, I think it's cool, but I can't help but wonder how it would have looked if I shot the same photo on the 2.8. So I mentioned that my friend had pulled up in his Supra, and these are the photos that I took of his car. Now by the time he pulled up, it was already almost fully dark outside. So these photos are in complete night, and they again were shot on the 70-200 f4. So this first photo that we're looking at of the back of his car, it does look a little grainy, but a little bit of noise reduction added to this image. And by the way, I have to say all of these photos that I'm showing you are edited. Looking at this photo, I really wouldn't say that it's a bad image. It's actually very, very sharp. And the fact that it's practically pitch black outside, it shows the quality of this lens. And it's crazy to think about because the price difference between the two, granted it was about a $1,500 price difference because I bought a used f4 versus a new 2.8. But even going from a brand new f4 to a brand new f2.8, it's maybe only like a $600 or $700 price difference. So by judging these photos, I think it's actually worth saving that $600 to $700 if you really can't afford it and you really want the 70-200 f4. I think you could actually really get away with a lot of low light photography with this lens. Comparing the f2.8 in a similar location to what I just showed you, it wasn't fully pitch black out, but it was in the same location. This is a photo of my friend's Charger again. And I gotta say, both lenses, sometimes it's hard to tell the quality difference between the two. This particular test that we're doing right now is for low light, but in daylight, and especially in the photos I took of the Porsche, it was really hard to tell which photo was shot on which lens and which camera body. After I edited them, the colors looked almost identical, and I was having a hard time differentiating between which one was which. If I put two Porsche photos side by side and you guys had to guess which one was which, I bet you guys wouldn't be able to do it. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna put two of the same photo that were shot on each lens on the screen, and I want you guys to try and guess in the comments which photo was shot on which lens. I'll give you guys a second to do that. Alright, so if you guys guessed correctly, reply to the comment that you put down and let me know in the comments below. Or if you guessed incorrectly, also let me know in the comments below. And I really genuinely want to know if you guys were able to tell the difference between the two lenses. It's really hard to tell on the compression. With such a zoom lens, you get so much compression in the background that you can almost not really tell what is bokeh and what is actually just from being zoomed in so much. Going back to the photos of my friend Supra, I'm going to show you this next one, which is an interior shot. And this was actually using his dome lights in the car. So that was a creative way to introduce some light into the scene. And if I zoom into the top of the steering wheel, I can actually see that it's pretty noisy. It's not as sharp as if I were to shoot this photo in the daytime, but it's still a very usable image. It's still very clean. And again, it is definitely something that I would post on my social media. And actually, I'm gonna post all of these photos, or most of these photos, on my social media. So if you wanna see them, make sure you're following me on Instagram. They're listed in the description below, or if you guys want a full gallery of these, let me know. I've done this before and I'd definitely be willing to do it again, but I could put these photos on my website for you guys to check out and judge for yourself. All right, so the next photo that we're gonna look at is another photo of the Supra. This photo was actually shot outside of Nathan's and it was pretty well lit. So if you look at the image, you can see that the ISO really wasn't that high, but scrolling through the images that were taken outside of Nathan's, they're pretty sharp. This is shooting at f4, this is shooting at nighttime. There is no daylight in this. I'm literally just shooting with whatever ambient light that I have. And that's one trick that you can use when you're shooting with an f4 lens. And if you're looking into getting the f4 instead of the f2.8, but you're worried about low light scenarios, all you'll really have to do is do your best to introduce as much light as possible into the image so you don't get as noisy of an image. These last couple of photos I want to show you were actually shot at nighttime. Now, I mentioned earlier that I did 3 shoots with only 2 lenses, and the reason for that is because the first time I went out, I took the f4 lens with me, and I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anybody to come and bring their car out, so I figured I live in New York City. I'm bound to find some cool cars if I go to like Times Square or something like that. So that's actually what I wound up doing. I drove out to Times Square and I found this one Charger, and I found a few other cars just to take photos of. Like this first photo that I'm gonna show you was just a random car I found in the street. I saw him pulling away and I asked him to stop in the middle just so I could take a photo. And I gotta say, the image quality on this really isn't the best. I don't know if it's because of my editing. I don't know if it's because I didn't have a polarizer on, or the glare that just is Times Square because of how lit it is. But I'm not the biggest fan of this particular photo. But if I look at some of the other photos that I took, like some of these cop cars that I'm scrolling through, or some other random cars that I just found, like this Honda CR-V, the image was actually pretty sharp. And again, it's one of those things where if you want to save your money and you'd rather buy the f4 instead of the 2.8, to get sharper images, all you would really have to do is just do your best to implement lighting so that way your images don't look as noisy or completely dark. All right, so now that we spoke about the specs, let's talk about usability wise. Now, the f2.8 and the f4, one of the major differences between the two is that the f2.8 actually weighs maybe about an entire pound more than the f4. And there's actually a version 2 that came out recently to where I believe the version 2 of the 2.8 weighs almost the same, if not only like this much more than the f4. But I bought the version 1, not the version 2, because I already spent enough money on the version 1, and the version 2 was like a few $100s more, but add that on to the original price that I was hoping to pay, and that's a lot more than I wanted to pay. So the difference between the two lenses primarily is the weight, and I noticed that especially when I was shooting, because I was actually able to one hand holding the f4 and I wasn't able to hold the f2.8 with one hand because I kind of felt like the lens was going to fall off my body. User wise, I think the f4 is definitely much more convenient just because it doesn't weigh as much, and the quality difference between the two, it's actually very, very close. And again, this is my personal opinion. I think you could definitely get away with shooting with the f4 or purchasing the f4 as opposed to the f2.8. The only time I would tell you to buy the f2.8 is if you were shooting in really, really low light conditions, and let's say you were filming a wedding or you're trying to film something at night or take photos at night. That's really where that f2.8 would really come in handy. The autofocus on both lenses is actually very, very amazing, and the image stabilization on both lenses is actually also very amazing, because I actually, for a lot of my photos, I was shooting at 1/50th and 1/80th of a shutter, which is very slow for a zoom lens, especially if the minimal focal length is 70 millimeters, because the rule of thumb is you're kind of supposed to be shooting at double whatever your shutter speed is at to kind of remove like the jitters in your hand. But between the image stabilization in the lens and the in-body image stabilization in my A7 III, it was actually really nice shooting with them. I was able to go with very slow shutter speeds. I was able to kind of push the limits on how low I can keep the ISO in shooting low light scenarios. And honestly, any of the 70-200s that you decide to go with, I say are worth it. So we're finally at the stage in the video where I can tell you which lens I wound up returning and which lens I wound up keeping. Now, remember, both of these lenses I purchased with my own money. Sony did not send me these lenses. This video is not sponsored by Sony. I spent my own money on both lenses. I went from wanting to go the cheap route and buying a used f4 to possibly wanting to buy a brand new f4, but then realizing that the price difference wasn't so crazy and that I could actually kind of afford it if I just purchased the f2.8. So the lens I wound up returning and the lens I wound up keeping is... I'm just kidding. You know what? I'm actually going to let you guys take a second to guess in the comments below. Do you think I kept the f2.8 or do you think I kept the f4? Remember, I'm not loaded. I'm on somewhat of a budget, and the difference between the f2.8 and f4, both of them are very sharp in my opinion. So which one do you guys think I kept? I'll give you a second. Did you guess it? Okay. So I wound up keeping the f2.8. Now note, you're probably thinking I just spoke about how amazing both lenses are and how I was kind of on a budget, but the main reason for me keeping the f2.8 is because I do a lot of weddings, and there are a number of weddings that I've been to where I was not able to implement lighting because either the couple didn't want it or the venue didn't allow it, and I kind of had to deal with the best I had. And if I'm shooting on a 70-200, or if I'm in a church or a venue that doesn't allow me to put any type of lighting on the people that I'm filming, the image really doesn't look that great, especially if I'm filming video. Yeah, I could probably get away with it because I shoot on Sony, and they're kind of stapled as the low light kings because I can push the ISOs really high, but I would want to do my best to keep the ISO low to get as sharp as an image as possible, and that's my sole reason for keeping the f2.8. I'm gonna go home now. It's getting dark outside and you can see that the street lamps are actually starting to turn on. But let me know what you thought about this video in the comments below. Let me know which lens would you rather get. If money was no object, or maybe if money was an object, would you go with the 70-200 f4 or would you go with the f2.8? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because all of that really does help and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.